Okay, so I have a couple products here that I wanted to kind of just run by. Some people always ask this question about cartridge systems versus like full-on tanks that have backwashing valves or straight in and outs. I wanted to just give you a quick overview of these so you can see these. Let me move this out of the way. First thing we're going to look at is just going to be the Big Blue cartridge system. It's about a little over 30 inches including the bracket height if you're measuring from there. It comes with a couple different types of filters. This is a sediment filter. Usually it's in the first position and it just takes out all the dirt. This one is FlowPro, and this is a standard carbon block, a pure flow carbon block. Now typically, depending on how the flow is, if the water was to go from here to here, you'd have your sediment here and your carbon block here, and that would be one of the things that you can use for the house. So it's just standard carbon sediment filtration. This carbon block typically weighs anywhere between about 5 pounds to 7 pounds. It just depends on who makes it. So a little bit of a variation here in the weight. The beautiful thing about Big Blue sediment filters, or excuse me, Big Blue cartridge systems, is that they use a simple wrench and that you change out the filters every 6 months to a year. So that's a good thing. It's very low cost. There's very little maintenance involved, and there's no real moving parts other than you having to just change out the filters. Now, some people may see that as kind of a hindrance. The only reason why is just because no one likes to go out to the system to actually just change the filters out. It's understandable. That's where these tanks come in. So this is a fiberglass tank. This particular one that I'm holding, that is in my hand right now, it's about 48 inches tall, plus an extra 3 or 4 inches for the head. This is what we call a straight in and out valve. The straight in and out valve is literally just in and out. There's no backwash, there's no electronics, there's nothing except a large tank like this. And inside the large tank you usually have a gravel bed or not, and you have one type of media inside. Now you can mix medias, but each media has their own life, so it's usually best to try to keep those media separate. So in this case, you want to if you want to use carbon, you just stick with just gravel and carbon, or just carbon, just straight carbon. The gravel inside a tank like this is used to just give a uniform distribution of water. So that's a good way to make sure that you don't get any channeling in this. And I'll talk about that in a second. But if you want a valve that actually does backwashing, you're going to need to use something like this, which is a power head that has backwashing capabilities. In this case, you actually have to have a drain connection. It goes on the same tank, nothing changes, but it does need power now, and it does need to have a drain connection. Sorry about that. So the difference between the two is the life of the media inside. Usually a tank like this carries about 28 pounds of carbon, whereas this would be about anywhere between 5 pounds and 7 pounds. It could be lighter, it could be heavier, but that's about the average weight of these kinds of carbon blocks. So you can see that they tend to last a little bit longer simply due to the weight. But one of the benefits of going with a cartridge system is the carbon block. The carbon block, again, let me pull this out again. The carbon block is a compressed carbon. So you actually have uniform channeling throughout the carbon itself. It prevents any kind of what we call channeling. Now channeling is when you have a media bed, and the media in this, let's just use this example. If there's media in here, loose media, like carbon fines and or resin for that matter, and you're having water push through, eventually what happens is that media will start to separate and create little channels of water for passage for water, That is what we call channeling. It happens with these kinds of tanks. So with an in and out downflow valve like this, you're going to have channeling. Carbon blocks prevent that channeling. So that's one of the main benefits of actually having a cartridge system. A little bit more in the maintenance, but it's a lower cost on the startup. In the long run, it's probably going to be about the same thing. The startup cost for getting one of these is a little bit more, actually, almost double if not triple the price, depending on what size and what type of a valve you're getting. Those make very big variations in the price. Some cartridge systems tend to go by gallon life, so it's not an easy thing to say, yes, you should change this every 3 months or 4 months. They actually go by gallons, especially with carbons. So with carbon filters, you can easily go, depending on the quality and the type and the brand, it can easily be anywhere between 20,000 gallons to even 200,000 gallons. It depends on the type of carbon, depends on the amount of carbon used, and a couple other factors. This here, same story goes. They don't actually have a rating for how much gallons a carbon would actually go through, but they usually average a lot higher than that, maybe about 200,000 gallons, 300,000 gallons. It just really depends. The best way to do this is to actually just check your water every year for just chlorine, especially if you're on city water. If you have city water, you can do a chlorine check. Very cheap, very easy. You can just buy litmus test strips, and within like a minute or two, you'll be able to find out if it's actually still removing chlorine. If it is, that's good. You don't need to change anything. If it's not, it's time to change it. So when it comes down to whole house filtration, it all boils down to how much you want to spend and how involved you want to be when it comes to actually changing the filters out. When you buy a tank like this, with an in and out valve or with a backwashing valve, your startup cost is going to be a little bit more. In and out valves are definitely less than a backwashing valves. There's less moving parts. There's no real cost to this kind of valve, whereas this can cost a few $100s by itself. So if you wanted to go fiberglass tank with an in and out valve, that's a great way to go. Very little maintenance involved. Very little problems for that matter. So when you go with this kind of tank, you have great full usage of the media. It's a great way to go. Costs a little bit more, but it's a good way to go as well. When it comes to these cartridge systems, this is a very low cost system to go with. It doesn't cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars. It just depends on if you want to build it yourself, you want us to build it for you. And when you do that, your startup cost can be anywhere between like maybe $100 to $200. And doing that, I mean, it's well less expensive than trying to buy a valve, which is a few $100s by itself. So the only difference here is that every 6 months to a year, you'll be changing out the filters yourself. So you get a little bit more involved in the process of maintaining the system. But for one thing's for sure, it costs less. So that's one way to look at it. It really just depends. Maybe in the end, with enough filter changes, they'll probably equal out in price. So that's also something to consider as well. But I really do hope that this is a little more informative and it really helps you on what you're trying to achieve. If you have any problems or any questions, do feel free to comment or even visit our site for more information. Thank you very much for watching.